office team for the pledge and then kick it to me, and I'll do the intro. I'll start in the intro and then start working my way down. That works.
Okay. Here, it's a very weird thing. That's right. That's right. Well, they were invited to come to the budget meeting, so now they're at the budget meeting. All right, so what do you got? By the way, did you see there's a guy who's running against the Marcosi kid? His name I've forgotten already. He came to my house yesterday. He's a Are we ready? Billy. Great job of straightening my plumb. And now basically the same thing. I'd like to call to order the Gateway School District Budget and Finance Committee meeting. Could you please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Schott, would you like to take over?
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for attending. We definitely appreciate the attendance, and it's nice to have a crowd to talk to. So, this is our third Budget and Finance Committee meeting this evening in discussions for the 18-19 fiscal year budget. One of the things that before we get to the budget tonight, one of the things that we like to do at this final public hearing for the budget, which is part of our bond continuing disclosure requirements, is for me just to provide a brief update in terms of where the district stands with that. Part of our policy, this is just our platform for doing that. So please bear with me. Is it on? It's not. That helps. Thank you. There we go. All right. In terms of our continuing bond disclosure, all outstanding bond issues require the district to make various disclosures of information prior to December 31st of each calendar year. The district currently has two outstanding bond issues, a series of 2012 bonds and a series of 2016 bonds. Total outstanding bonds, $44,495,000 is the district's bond debt service currently. Some of the things that we're required to do, and this is in particular in years in between bond issues, we have to file our audited financial statements prior to December 31st. There's various operating data, statistics that are compiled and released, top 10 lists, for instance. That's also filed by December 31st. And in addition, the district also has voluntary disclosures of information consisting of, we file our budget document as well as our annual financial report. That information is out there so any of our bond holders is able to go to the SEC's EMA website and view any and all of those documents at any particular point in time. The district utilizes a firm called Digital Assurance Certification, or DAC Bond. They are our bond continuing disclosure partner. They do an excellent job. They provide assistance to me in a couple areas, in particular in disclosing any bond rating changes by either, say, Moody's, Fitch, some of the other folks, Standard & Poor's. They assist in that behalf. Also, they also assist with me in obtaining my required CPE training. That's one of the other requirements in terms of my position in terms of making these various disclosures each year on behalf of the district. So another very important area as well. Again, as I mentioned before, some of our disclosure activities, we have previously adopted policies and procedures related to this information. Again, consisting of the filing of various required reports and other operating data. And currently, I'd like to report that we are currently up to date and everything is filed on time. Again, if anything in terms of any notifications, material events in a timely manner to SEC, we have been doing that as well. And really the only in terms of material event is in terms of some bond rating changes. Fortunately, as some of the examples that are indicated up there, we don't have any debt service delinquencies, bankruptcy, anything along those lines. So again, nothing negative to report in terms of what's transpired over this particular term from the last time we spoke last year at this time. So that's the end of that SEC. Well, now we're going to transition over to our budget. And I promise I don't have 50 slides tonight, so.
75.
Yeah, not that either, so I'm taking it easy on everybody. We only have 18 tonight. Again, as I stated before, this is our final public hearing in terms of the compilation of the general fund budget for 2018-2019 fiscal year. Currently, summary of proposed final total revenues for 18-19 sitting at $73,770,000. Please note that this number currently does not include a real estate tax increase in the total amount in order to illustrate the deficit on a later slide. So in comparison to the current proposed 18-19 to 17-18 reflects a decrease of $1,979,000 or 2.61% decrease from the 17-18 budgeted revenues. Now, in terms of the expenditures, proposed final total expenditures currently sits at $75,621,000, decrease of $128,000, or 0.17% under the fiscal year 17-18 budgeted total expenditures. So, taking both those numbers together, in terms of our shortfall or deficit, again, our decrease in revenues, decrease in expenditures, net proposed final total budget shortfall or deficit for 18-19 currently at $1,851,000. Would be balanced through the utilization of a tax increase, which we'll take a look at a little more specifically in some later slides, but that would bring in approximately $1,230,000 plus $621,000 in unassigned fund balance. Both those items working together would close that deficit of $1,851,000. In terms of some new significant expenditure increases for 18-19, now this is a slide we had if you were at the May meeting, but it is very significant and wanted to highlight it again at the current June meeting. Charter and cyber charter school tuition. Additional required budgetary expenditure increase of $635,000 for the 18-19 fiscal year. And if I recall correctly, we saw an increase of 37 students during the 17-18 fiscal year. So that's also impacting our current year budget. So you figure about $635,000 we didn't budget for the current year.
Just if I could add to that, Mr. Schott,
Yes.
for the public to understand and predominantly our staff. When we have students and families that move into the district, we've seen an increase in amount of families that perhaps may have attended Propel Homestead. And when they move into the Monroeville, Pitcairn area, they have every right and option to continue to attend Propel Homestead. And that has been the case traditionally with those families that we've seen move in. Even bypassing another charter, which may be 2 blocks away from a family that moved into Pitcairn, not attending Propel Pitcairn, but attending Propel Homestead. And I look at Bonnie Isha because whenever we see these enrollments, we are in fact obligated then for the tuition and also the transportation. So there may be a van that drives up to, say, 10th Street in Pitcairn, picks up 3 students out of that family, and drives to Homestead, and then must return and pick up. Those are the type of scenarios that are becoming more frequent, not only in this school district, but in every school district surrounding us. That's what we're faced with.
One other very frustrating part in terms of the charter school tuition expenditures is that, again, there's brick and mortar charter schools and there's also cyber charter schools. Unfortunately, we pay the same tuition rate for a regular ed student and a special ed student to each type of entity. And in terms of brick and mortar to cyber doesn't have the same types of overhead costs as a brick and mortar. So it's really not fair that we pay them the same amount. There's been pushes, maybe about 3 or 4 years ago, they came very close to trying to change the tuition rate structure. Was not successful in that. I definitely think that at some point they need to readdress that. That needs to be more equitable. It's not fair that they receive the same amount as a brick and mortar. But again, unfortunately, until legislation changes that, we have to pay the same amount. And again, it's very frustrating, but it is a significant drain on our resources, no doubt about that. The other big new significant expenditure increase we've unfortunately had to increase for 18-19 is our outside placements for special education students. Additional required budgetary expenditure increase of about $748,000 for 18-19. Again, another significant expenditure area. Now, again, unfortunately, we have expenditure increases, but unfortunately, we also have revenue decreases. And the biggest one, and again, I'm sure everyone in this room's heard of already, but we still have to highlight. It's very important, very significant. It's Monroeville Mall tax assessment decrease. Specifically, I want to say it was probably a week or two ago, we got the actual drawdown request submitted from Allegheny County. So this is the actual amount that will be on the agenda in June for a check to be cut to CBL, the owners of Monroeville Mall. Again, for 3 tax years, 15, 16, 17, $1,020,290.90. That's a significant refund. But worse yet, moving forward, we still have a loss of revenue for 18-19 and every year after that, in theory, of approximately $509,000. But the worst part of it, and I got into a little more detail in May regarding this, but there could be additional decreases in value for the mall. This may not be over.
They can reassess.
In terms of reassessment. It may not be next year. It may be 3 years from now. In terms of a commercial property, just a little bit of information for everyone. You not only have the value, the assessed value of the land and building, but for commercial, it's the rental income. And as everyone knows, last time you happened to be over at Monroeville Mall, there's a lot of open spots over there. So there's a lot less rental income coming in the CBL.
Can the district contest what they fought, what the mall fought? Can you guys go back after them and say, no, it's not worth that much, or no?
Well, even with the values that lie behind these adjustments, our folks did have conversations with their folks. An amicable agreement was devised for that. I did review that information, and given some of the, without getting into all the details, some of the potential negative scenarios that could have still happened, I think given the nature of where this is, we ended up probably about as good as we could come out with on this situation. But again, it's an area we have to keep an eye on and monitor moving forward.
The glass half full would be the mall rebounds, recovers, the economy. More retail development goes in, then we can offer up a reassessment to increase the value.
Yes. But again, unfortunately, that's $509,000 of revenue that's not going to be in our 18-19 budget. It's gone. Again, this is for 18-19, 19-20, 2021. We have to wait and see. All right, as I mentioned before, in terms of some of our, the equivalent of a tax increase, the district is limited to a tax increase at 2.8% of the index. So exactly what does that mean? The current millage, 19.3264 mils, times the 2.8%, which means a maximum increase in millage of 0.5411. And as I stated before, that would bring in approximately $1,230,000 of revenue, of net revenue to the district. Currently, as is indicated below, the district is 13th lowest in millage out of 42 school districts in Allegheny County. And just taking this number that we'll actually see, let me just turn to the next slide here. At the 19.8675, we would potentially move to 15th lowest. But again, that doesn't take into account any other neighboring school districts. We know all from monitoring and reading the paper, there's quite a few districts around us. I want to say probably just about every district around us is also considering tax increases as well. So in terms of what our ultimate rank would be, potentially for 18-19, we'll have to see once everyone passes their budget and sets their millage rate. The Allegheny Intermediate Unit actually does a nice survey of collecting that data. They share it with all of us. And again, we share that with the board and also with everyone at these meetings as well when we have that as well. But again, that would be the maximum millage rate. And I don't think anything else new on there from last time. This was just a table we had added, and it goes back and shows all the way back to 0203 in terms of where the millage rate was, whether it was a tax increase, what was the number of mills of the tax increase, whether it was used in combination with the utilization of fund balance, and exactly how much of the fund balance was initially committed to balance the budget. Or in some cases, with some of these larger amounts, some of these amounts represented transfers of fund balance to fund some of our renovations. One of the most, I want to say it was probably the 9-10 school year. You see the almost $2.7 million. That was the year we added the addition on to Cleveland Stewart Elementary School. We actually utilized some of these funds and also funds derived from a bond refinancing to add that wing on and to make the various improvements to the building. So again, when you look at this, not all these numbers were required to balance a budget, so to speak.
Similar to the $3 million that was used this past year
exactly.
for infrastructure renovations to our buildings.
Exactly. Yeah, we've been fortunate, that, and we'll see later on in some of our other slides, that we've had fund balance to be able to fund required projects without having to take on additional debt, whether it being short-term debt or more long-term bond-related debt. So taking the 2.8% and utilizing the median taxable values, and again, these are statistics that I have derived from the Allegheny County website, based on a median value in Monroeville, $108,200. Maximum 2.8% index tax hike would be $58.55 per year, and then further showing it per month, $4.88 per month. Likewise, in the borough of Pitcairn, median assessed value, $34,800. Maximum amount at 2.8%, $18.83. And also in terms of looking at that on a monthly amount, $1.57.
Excuse me, how many buildings or houses do you have in Monroeville, so that if you're going to see tax increase, how many houses are it going to affect? 10,000, 20,000? How many residents in Monroeville?
I want to say the top of my head when I put this next section together for the CD I received from the county, I think all, and I'm trying to remember how, because I sorted the CD out a number of different times, but I want to say in terms of taxable residences, I want to say there was like 9,100 taxable. Now, please don't quote me on that if there's anyone here from the media, but I'd have to look that up. But I have various breakdowns, and as indicated here in the third bullet point, the Office of Property Assessment sends out a CD with all the breakdowns, and I actually go through that entire CD, break out taxable properties, non-taxable properties, commercial, industrial, every type of classification from Monroeville, Pitcairn, and have all those statistics available that I can be able to go back and say, okay, here's the numbers, here's the composition of the type of property that we have in the municipality of Monroeville in the borough of Pitcairn for that.
Can I just add something?
Sure.
You probably know what I'm going to say is that tax increase doesn't just affect residences. It's going to affect the business community in Monroeville, and we have to think about that because tax increases on our businesses can drive businesses out of the community. So that's one thing that's not really reflected in this discussion as we're talking about home ownership and how it affects the household. It also affects the commercial business district here.
I was surprised by the number before this, like $1.2 million, the 2.8 increase is going to bring. That all this increase is going to bring to the school district is 1.2 million?
That's correct. That's correct.
Could you repeat the question or comment for the folks at home?
Compounded yearly, though.
Sure. He was saying in terms of the 2.8% increase, it only brings in $1,230,000. That is correct. Starting back in 2006, Gateway and all school districts in the Commonwealth are required to comply with what's known as Act 1. And that was put into place in order to limit the amount of tax increase that a school district is able to impose on its taxpayers. Previously to that, if you needed to raise the millage rate 5 mils, you could do that. Not anymore. There are certain steps that need to be taken. How it is right now, and I can go briefly into it, is that you have an index rate. There's a standard index rate that's provided. There's also an adjusted index rate. The 2.8% that we're seeing this evening is actually an adjusted index rate. So with that, the district is able to go up to 2.8% without taking the next step. The next step in the process, and there's various timelines that are associated with this, is that you could apply for referendum exceptions. There's 3 referendum exceptions available. One is very specific in regards to grandfathered debt, which the district doesn't have. The other 2 are related to increases in PCERS cost and special education costs. Originally, there used to be 10 exceptions that could be applied for. So again, there's not really, they've really restricted our options even on that if we wanted to. The ultimate, say for instance, if you needed enough money and the index wasn't enough, maybe a referendum exception or 2 wasn't going to be enough to close your deficit and you didn't have any other options, you could actually put a question on the ballot to increase the millage beyond those 2 areas, your index and referendum exceptions. Now, as we all know, referendums are usually
unsuccessful.
Yeah, very unsuccessful. Correct. It's usually a no-win situation going into that. There's been maybe only a handful of districts, I think, have even attempted that, and again, very negative results from that. That's definitely an extreme measure in terms of trying to raise the index for that.
Mr. Schott?
Yes.
There are 14,500 households in Monroeville and approximately 1,500 in Pitcairn.
Thank you. Now, in terms of the homestead exclusion, again, this is something, and actually this is the 11th year in a row that the state has been able to raise gaming monies and make a distribution to all the school districts in the Commonwealth. And again, this is revenue neutral for our district and for every district. So essentially what that is that we provide a homestead exclusion to the eligible properties. So basically it's a decrease on your tax bill, and which we'll see in another slide specifically what that equates to. And the district actually receives those gaming funds for that. So again, we provide the same amount that's indicated here, $1,459,000. That's the total amount of homestead relief that we provide on the tax bills to eligible homesteads the district receives. And we receive that in 2 payments throughout the course of the fiscal year. But again, just want everyone to know this is not a windfall by any means. This is a revenue neutral transaction. So in terms of homesteads, again, this is determined by Allegheny County, and they've reported that there will be 8,101 homesteads eligible to receive the homestead exclusion for 1819. There are 7,571 of those in Monroeville and 530 of those in Pitcairn. And those exclusion amounts will be $180.35, which, if I recall, I think the assessed value of that is in the neighborhood of approximately, I think, $9,600, just to round that off.
Can you explain what that means? Why, like, that 8,101, is that just, you have to be a
It's really the
homeowner for that, you can't be a
gaming money.
rental property for
That's correct. These properties represent essentially you own your home. That's where you lay your head at night. That's your homestead. It's not a commercial property. You know, if you're renting from someone, you know, that individual is paying for that. They're not living there. That property is not eligible for a homestead exclusion. One of the things that to keep in mind, because actually this amount even decreased from last year, is that when a residential property changes ownership, the homestead exclusion does not automatically transfer to the new owner. The new owner must reapply and get that. And unfortunately, there's various deadlines for the county that you have to apply for the county to make that determination. And if you're not one of these 8,101 on the CD I have, you're not getting the homestead exclusion. You could get it the next day and think you're going to get it. You're not going to get it. You have to wait an entire year to the 1920 budget to be included in the total provided from Allegheny County. But yes, we get the gaming money, but we provide the reduction and the actual invoices that everyone receives.
So the reduction that we get on our homes is 180.
That's exactly what's going to be. Yes, you're welcome. Let's see what else I want to say about that. That'll come to me. But again, it's a revenue neutral process. Oh, I know, I was going to say. So in terms of what the district is required to do by December 31st of every year, we're required to identify any properties who do not have a homestead exclusion and send a mailing out to them. So receive that document. You know, if you're an individual who just purchased, say, a residential property in Monroeville, say you just closed on a sale yesterday. In December of this year, you would be getting one of those forms from the district. And you would fill out that form, you would submit to Allegheny County prior to the deadline. The county would review that form. In a situation that it's a homestead, you're living, that's where you're laying your head, you would be eligible for that. You would receive a letter back stating that your homestead exclusion has been granted. And then at that point, you would know that next year, you would be included and be eligible to receive gaming money, assuming there is gaming money to be distributed. That's one of the things. And unfortunately, even with this amount, the $1,459,000, it hasn't really increased very much over those 11 years. You know, this was touted to be to fund property tax relief, and you know, no one was going to pay real estate taxes anymore. Unfortunately, a lot of the other portion of the gaming monies has been diverted to various other state causes. So again, I want to say even this amount, I want to say decreased from 17, 18, 18, 19, for probably by maybe $865. Was, you know, not very much. And probably from year to year, it's probably fluctuated within $1,000. So in terms of a comparison to the homestead exclusion, in terms of a net homestead exclusion and the millage increase, looking at the full amount from Monroeville, the $58.55, and netting that with the exclusion, there would still be a net credit effect of $121.80. Likewise, in the borough of Pitcairn, $18.83, again on a median value property, the $180.35, still a net credit $161.52. As I mentioned previously, in terms of fund balance, and again, some of the negative areas that we've seen, some that we've mentioned tonight in terms of charter schools, in terms of various refunds, etc., that is having an impact on our fund balance. Again, we started off the fiscal year at $14,566,000. And some of the items we have on there, I think as previously mentioned, and we saw on the previous slide, $3,819,000 was committed from the fund balance to be utilized for various projects. I'm going to get this thing to work. There we go. Some of our current year real estate tax refunds, some of our prior year real estate tax refunds. And this number, that $1,021,000 we saw previously, is part of this number. Sorry about that. Again, and what we try to do, we try to identify when we have a specific number. We've seen some decrease in Title I subsidy, Title III subsidy. As I mentioned before, increase in charter disciple school, about $730,000. This is based on our projection of how much additional funds we're going to expend in the current year that was not budgeted. again, due to those additional 37 students attending those schools. So taking all those items into account, as indicated here, decrease of $5.8 million in fund balance. But again, as I have noted here, it's very possible this number will actually be greater or less. And if you've attended these meetings before, you've heard me utilize this term. I like to call it until the dust settles on the entire fiscal year. So what I mean by that is that we take into account and reconcile every dollar of revenue that's attributable to 17-18. And we make sure we record that in 17-18. Likewise, on the flip side of that, every expenditure that's attributable to 17-18, we record that in 17-18. So until we get to that point, which will probably be in early September, we'll be able to know exactly what the actual net effect will be on this beginning number up here. So that, unfortunately, stay tuned on that. Yes?
What do you think an acceptable variance is in that? I mean, are we talking about 2 million difference one way or another? Are we talking 1,000? What do you think is acceptable?
It's hard to say at this particular point in time for that, because I'll use some of our revenues for example. We have a couple revenue streams that are probably about 2 months behind. And you know, the one revenue stream I'm thinking of, just to give you an idea, is delinquent real estate taxes. So that's one of those revenue streams. You know, if you have a couple different people that maybe decide they're not going to pay, maybe they're on a payment plan, maybe they skip a month, that could have effect on your revenues. Likewise, you may have an individual who is a delinquent property that may decide to pay in full. So it may increase it significantly.
When you say significantly, give me a number, because last year's presentation was off by 1.7 million. Is that, we end up with 1.7 million more when you figure it out at the end of June, or 1.7 million less, or is that an anomaly?
Well, some of the things we saw last year, and I don't have the one slide with me, but one of the documents I prepare at the conclusion of the fiscal year, the conclusion of the local audit as well, I look at all the expenditure and revenue categories, and I look for the major variances. So for instance, when you're looking back to 16-17 fiscal year, we had a milder winter. We spent less on utilities, on natural gas, some of those items. Likewise, we had other expenditures as well. Back in 16-17, we actually continued to see a dip in our charter schools. It actually went down a bit from what we had budgeted for. Likewise, revenue. So you basically had a combination of things. We did add quite a bit of, I want to say it was probably about $3.8 million back to fund balance that year for 16-17. But again, we also had a lot of revenues that came in significantly higher than what was anticipated. So, you know, again, it was a combination of expenditures that coming in less than budgeted and revenues coming in greater than budgeted. So it's kind of like the best of both worlds that we saw in 16-17.
And also, with Mrs. Isha's help, we were able to decrease the transportation budget by nearly $400,000 through combining and consolidation of routes.
And that's a really good point, Dr. Short, is that even after the budget is approved, we continue to monitor and to look for additional ways to save money wherever we can. You know, it's not a stagnant process that, okay, it's done, you know, we put it on the shelf, you know, we don't have to look at for 8 months until it's time to work on the budget again. You know, any type of opportunity that may present itself to either combine services, you know, whatever the case may be, where we think we can save some money and do it in a very smart way, we definitely try to take advantage of that as much as possible. But again, unfortunately, there still are some times when things are just beyond our control.
What was the budget last year, the 2017-18 budget? What was the surplus that we ended up with for this budget?
I mean, are you talking about 16-17 going into 17-18 that we added?
17-18. Yeah, you have a projection of it.
Well,
So 1 year ago today, what were you projecting?
well, for this one, when we put this budget together, we were looking at the decrease of $3,819,000. That was the start of the fiscal year, you know, going into the start of fiscal year.
We thought that was what our 17-18 budget was going to be.
Correct.
33.8 million.
Correct. which made sense when you think about it because we just added $3.8 million to the fund balance. So we knew we identified some various projects that we needed to do. So it made sense. Why not? You added it to it, take it right back out and utilize it for those projects. Again, we didn't have to incur any additional debt in terms of interest expense, et cetera, for that. So it made sense. But that was our initial number. That was the initial number going into 17-18. But again, as we've seen, we have no way of knowing that there was going to be 37 additional kids go to charter schools, or some of the other required outside placements that may have occurred. New students moving in that require additional services that we all know cost a lot of money.
So you're saying though that we had things that we didn't anticipate, which I understand, but then that we had other areas where we gained funding that we didn't anticipate.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's a budget. It's all an estimate. So the revenues, some revenues are going to come in less than anticipated. Some revenues are going to come in greater than anticipated. Likewise on the expenditure side as well. Some expenditures.
Positive or negative then?
This is negative. This is a decrease.
Paul, did debt service go down $1 million?
Yes.
Debt service went down $1 million.
Debt service did go down.
So what you paid in debt service, what you budgeted in 17-18 was $3,501,000 and $747. And then this year you're budgeting $2,578,000, a reduction of $1 million.
It's significant. And actually,
that's about the same as the tuition for the charter school, and around the same.
It's some of that.
$1.3 million for that, and then $1 million for that. It's about a $300,000 difference, right?
Yeah. And thank you for reminding me about that, because when we refinanced the bonds back in September of 16, again, that budget was already set. So we were able to take advantage of the market at that particular point in time. So, and that year as well, we had budgeted basically the full debt service. So by refinancing the bonds, there were a couple payments we did not have to make for that. So we actually had some immediate savings in 16-17, savings in 17. So 16-17, additional savings in 17-18 that we incorporated in the budget. And we're also seeing the final year savings that we've incorporated into 18-19. But as I also mentioned back in May, 19-20, we go back to the full debt service requirement, which, when I say full debt service, principal and interest on bonds, which is slightly greater than full $4 million. So again, there's going to be about if I recall the slide correctly, about $1.2 million in net debt service that we're going to see for 19-20.
Did they sell the Miracle Mile this year for $87 million?
Yes.
Now, what was that assessed at prior to its sale? Are you appealing that assessment based on that?
I believe there is.
Didn't I read the paper it was 99% occupied? So all those revenues that you were talking about would be applicable there. So it's possible that you could have a revenue windfall from the Miracle Mile if you win that appeal?
It's possible, but the one thing about that, like we saw with and generally speaking in all of our appeals, it could be a couple years until it's actually finalized. So unfortunately, like in that situation, like if we were using like 99 compared to the sale amount, I couldn't plan on that additional revenue coming in during 18-19. I mean, there's no way of doing that. Likewise with the appeal in Monroeville Mall, there was no way for me to say, okay, I need to build this in, like come up with some amount to decrease revenue and say, okay, I know this isn't going to come in, because again, it was just impossible to know that.
Of course, that would be 0.5% on $87 million.
That was one of the.
In there right now, so that would be the entirety of that.
Correct.
So that detransfer number that you have 400,000, clearly is going to be higher than
Sure.
that. Other properties have sold some for over $1 million. So that detransfer could be could be $300,000, and that might be a wash then.
I'd have to look for the exact amount, but no, that's another good point, is that in the current year our deed transfer revenue is up because of that specific sale. So it's one of those things when you look at any of our revenues, and let's use revenues as an example. You might look at a revenue category and we'll use deed transfer and say, wow, that's really high this year. Why did you only budget less than that? Well, that's a one-time item there. I want to say there was one or two other sales that also occurred current year that we're not going to see that revenue for next year. So that's one of the things I look at as well when I budget revenues. Again, knowing those things and keeping that in mind. Likewise, as I mentioned before, I alluded to the delinquent real estate taxes. I want to say we had 3 or 4 delinquent properties who actually paid in full paid in full back in September, October of last year. So again, those numbers are higher than I anticipate where they're going to be next year. I anticipate those numbers to come down for 18-19, and those numbers are reflected in the 18-19 revenue total that we're seeing here this evening. Yes?
Just another question about revenue. I can't seem to find it. I was just trying to Google it. Do school districts anticipate any revenue from medical marijuana from the state?
No.
And
No, we haven't. I mean, that's a whole can of worms of itself. The one.
Well, we got gambling, so that usually.
Well, my opinion on that is that it's unfortunately it's probably coming down the road because it is a very tempting revenue stream. There has been 6 states possibly. I'm just off the top of my head that have initiated that. That may end up being maybe the vehicle to fund property tax relief. I mean, we don't know at this particular point in time. Maybe that is. I mean, again, they touted gaming whenever they brought gaming, and that was going to fund property tax relief. So, you know, I wouldn't hold my breath on that one. Let's put it that way. But it could be. It's very possible. Very possible. I'm sorry.
So now I have a two-part question. So, what you're saying is the new building that's going up by the mall, which is the medicinal marijuana facility, we don't get any revenue on that brand new real estate facility?
Now, I have to say I'm not familiar with that particular property.
Right next to
I would say with that, right off the top of my head, there would probably be mercantile tax on that, possibly. Yeah, it would fall under the mercantile.
There's 2 of them in Monroe. There's one down off of Los Angeles. So, I mean, that's a revenue service, whether it's mercantile tax or
Yeah. I have to admit, this is the first I've heard about, so I'd have to look into that a little bit more.
Yeah, it's called the village center. But my second question is, how many of the 8,000 residents that are currently homestead, being that real estate property in Virgo, is going off the shelf in sometimes less than a week? How many of the new properties that have sold from in this year, per se, is that accounted into that 8,000? You've had more homes that you turn over in Virgo or in the district in the past 12 months than you have.
Well, like I said, they have, I believe a property owner has until March 31st to apply to the county for that. So say like if you closed on a property today, again, you would get a mailing from the district in December. You would fill that out, send it to the county. They would review it. They would grant your homestead exclusion, and then you would be on the list. So this time next year, you would be included in the 8,101 properties.
That's a potential increase in all the homes that have changed hands in the district, right? As far as taxes.
Well, no, I mean, because the way I look at it, I mean, if you have a home that's currently being taxed and it just changes ownership, I mean, we're still taxing it. But I think we're. Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of where there could be some additional revenue in terms of a sale would be if say it's a property that hasn't sold in 50 years. Let's just use that as an example. Say it's assessed at a very low amount compared. Let's say it's assessed $50,000. Maybe it actually sells at $300,000. Well, you know, you have a $250,000 difference in there. Most likely in that situation, it would be appealed by the district. So there would be some additional.
I mean, those houses are getting. I heard one got 18 contracts in a week. I mean, their homes are selling for higher than the value that probably their original assessed.
Yeah, the district is taking residential appeal, not only commercial but also residential appeals. Yeah, we're definitely take those all the time, and there's quite a few pending as well. I can definitely say that. But again, even with a lot of those appeals, sometimes they're cleared up very quickly. Sometimes, unfortunately, like with all the commercial appeals, it takes several years, as we saw with having to refund 3 years of paid in real estate taxes. So again, it does vary. Now again, in terms of, again, this is still estimated, but you know, there's 3 components of fund balance, as indicated there: unassigned, non-spendable, committed. I won't go into all the definitions. I will say, if you'd like to take a look at this in a little more detail, the May PowerPoint is on the district's website. It is very much more detailed than what we're presenting this evening. This PowerPoint as well will also be presented and placed on the district website. If not tonight, Micah will post it first thing in the morning for you as well. So again, I won't go into the various descriptions in terms of what these categories are. It is in the May PowerPoint, some very good information. But again, looking at where we would be potentially at this point in time with our best information we have available, taking the 8.7 million divided by this projected budget, it still takes the fund balance to be at 11.56%. And again, just to highlight, total recommended fund balance is between 5 and 15%. So it's still, even at this amount, it's still in a very healthy range, in my opinion. So, in terms of, so what does that projected fund balance for 17-18 look like when we apply our 18-19 utilizations of fund balance? That's what this slide depicts. Specifically, looking at transfer of fund balance to capital projects, $1,812,000. And as we saw on the previous slide, in addition to the tax increase, the utilization of additional $621,000. So those two numbers together, $2.4 million. The $2.4 million from the 8.7 would be approximately $6.3 million. So again, just utilizing the 18-19 expenditure number because we don't have a 19-20 expenditure number, that's still over 8%. And again, right in the middle, actually, bless you, greater than being right in the middle between 5 and 15%. So again, still a very healthy amount to be able to have $6.3 million. But again, in terms of what this actual amount will be until we officially close the books for 17-18 and reconcile all of our accounts, that way we'll know exactly what our true net effect will be for the current fiscal year. So stay tuned on that as well. And again, this is some of the areas I'd covered before in terms of the current budget process. Again, we utilize a not to exceed index resolution of the 2.8% previously adopted by the board. That was something that was done back in January. Again, referendum exceptions were not utilized. So again, we were saying that we would not go above the 2.8%, which is 0.5411 mils, and stick to that limit. Proposed final budget for 18-19 was adopted by the board back on May 21st. And again, as I previously said, the budget is displayed via the required state form called the PD 2028. It's a very summary format. That is on the district's website, as well as a 3-part document prepared at the same particular point in time. Again, a snapshot in time. It has changed. It is all the detail that comprises the summary document. In my opinion, a very good document. You can actually see where every dollar has been earmarked in the entire budget. And again, as we are seeing, as we've already moved into June, it's hard to believe, but we're still keeping on to our pre-Act 1 budgetary timeline, which means that the next official action by the board would occur on Wednesday, June 27th. At that particular point in time, the budget will be officially set, as well as the millage rate will be officially set for the 18-19 fiscal year. But again, I'd like to say that, you know, you've heard me say that snapshots, you know, we're still working on the budget. We've made changes on the budget even today. We'll be making changes on the budget tomorrow as new information becomes available, whether it be expenditures, revenues. We'll make adjustments to that. There's been some positive adjustments. There's been some continued negative adjustments. We'll reflect that information in the budget to keep it as accurate as possible, no matter where whichever direction it may take us. But we continue to do that throughout the entire process. Again, trying to keep it a living document as much as possible, and so we reflect the true and accurate financial situation for the Gateway School District. All right, questions?
Before we take some questions, it's important to understand that this has been a process that actually got started back in November of 2017. And a lot of work has been put into this budget. It's a preliminary budget. It is still moving, and whenever I say moving, we have recommended a tax increase to the board, and it's reflected in the preliminary budget. However, understand that if the tax increase does not happen, there would have to be additional cuts, and in all likelihood, this would be reflected in programs and staff. So at this point in time, we've had discussions with our board. The tax increase is still listed in the preliminary budget, and we would be able to finalize this number within the next several weeks for the final vote on the 27th. Questions? Yes.
Paul.
Paul.
Hey, Paul. Based on your slide there.
Mark, why don't you use the microphone so the folks at home can hear you, please?
Okay, thank you. I appreciate your hard work, Paul, doing this. I know it's a massive task. But I had a question. Based on your slide, right now the proposal of the administration is to spend 1.812 on capital improvements. And that's incorporated into the 75 million. You had, go back. Yeah, right there. So it says that 1.812 is coming out of the fund balance. That's incorporated in your $75 million, correct?
That's correct.
Right. So this is not an ongoing thing. This is a one-time shot, correct? That's not something that's something you could change, right? You could reduce that to $1 million, correct? Yeah.
For 1 second. In term. Well, the one thing I was just thinking as you were talking to point out in terms of and I'll call it the proper utilization of fund balance. Ideally, you want to utilize fund balance for one-time expenditures or expenditures that say maybe it's something like, I know currently we have the stadium wall being worked on. Well, that wall may never have to be replaced for another 50 or 60 years. So that's definitely a good utilization of that. There's been other budgets, as we saw on the previous screen, where I had utilizations of fund balance where we did commit certain amounts of fund balance. We were lucky in some of those years; we never had to tap into the fund balance. So we're talking these smaller amounts, $400,000, $500,000, $600,000. Depending on how the fiscal year turns out, we may not even touch the additional 621. I mean, in theory, it's very possible for that. But the other thing is, in terms of having a fund balance and a healthy fund balance, is that we have it to be able to absorb, like we saw, the $1,020,000 for the mall. I mean, I really honestly don't think there's too many of our neighbors that could cut a check for $1,020,000 out of their checking account right now and pay that. I really don't. They would have to probably take a loan out to make such a payment. We're fortunate in that we didn't have to do that. We have that healthy fund balance. But again, just to answer that, but in terms of the $1,812,000, sure. I mean, it's a committed amount right now, but until those various projects are bid.
You don't have to do that.
Correct.
You have to do $1 million, right?
It's yes.
You can do 800,000. That goes to another question. You have in technology, so that's not an ongoing expenditure, but it's incorporated into your budget.
It's correct.
Right, okay. And you have in technology, you have.
That's okay, Paul. You have in technology 1,887,000, or in technology. That does not include salaries of those working in technology. That's just technology. So that's not an ongoing expenditure as well, right? You could choose to spend $1 million. You could choose to spend 800,000. You could choose to spend 1.2 million. But you're recommending 1,887, right?
Just to note, there are some one-time purchases in there, but there's also some lease purchases, some ongoing lease purchases. I want to say some of that total amount is reflected in Mr. Brown's budget is reflective of Apple lease. So we're entering year 2 of an Apple lease, as well as year 2 of I think it was Chromebooks, the iPads as well. Yeah, the iPads so there's actually 2 lease payments. So part of that in terms of we're committed to a lease. So some of that is fixed, as well as we have copiers in there that were fixed lease amounts as well. Various software subscriptions. I mean, Mr. Brown. Yeah, but there are some new technology purchases that that they're looking at doing that. In theory, you could maybe part back. But again, if you're talking about parting back technology, ultimately, what is that doing in terms of when you want to utilize the technology with a curriculum? I mean, is that setting us back a year? Is it setting us back at 2 years? What does that mean by paring some of that back? So again, when you look at any aspect of the budget, you really have to ask, what's the ripple effect of taking this out or putting this in?
Mr. Schott, if I may, Paul. Mr. Wallace, you're talking about the kind of discretionary nature of the 1.8 million. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, we could spend, let's make it 0. And if you do that enough years, you get a school that's falling apart physically, like we have right now. A number of schools that have reached a point where there's a serious discussion about, are these worth fixing or must they be replaced? So although these look like discretionary numbers, that's a decision you make, and when you decide to, as they say now, kick that can down the road, it winds up getting kicked 3 decades down the road, and instead of a $1 million investment in a building, you've got a $60 million.
Oh, I'm sure that's true. I'm just.
Oh, I appreciate
it's not
you saying that, Mark.
I'm sure that's, certainly that's true. But those aren't regular expenditures. Those are by your discretion based on your decisions, right?
Well, again, let me interrupt. Yes and no. I mean, you have to maintain a building, right?
Well, I mean, I think that.
I heard someone yell out about technology. Yes.
That's what he's talking about, technology. If I'm talking about the infrastructure of the building, I'm talking about iPads.
I mean, it says
about $1.8 million.
capital projects.
We're talking about the 1.887 in the
I'm
technology expenditure.
sorry,
we were discussing.
we were talking
Yeah,
about
I mean,
this
both. I'm
first.
talking about both. Yeah, I'm talking about both.
Get the
Yeah,
technology in a
yeah.
minute.
But I mean, I kind of made my point, and I understand yours. You know that you're making decisions based on that. But I'm saying that those are decisions that you're making that aren't on reliable spending expenditure. Moreover, in your fund balance, Paul said they should be one-time things, but you've assigned some of them for things like pension costs and healthcare costs, which are regular expenditures, right? Not one-time expenditures.
Right, but they're going up.
Okay.
They're increasing.
What would you think would be a circumstance where you would utilize that money? And if you did, you'd be utilizing it for regular expenditures. But that's okay. I mean, I understand that as well. I kind of like to say this. I think you should raise the taxes. I think that that the last time you raised taxes, Paul has it listed as a tax increase, but it really wasn't. It was a tax adjustment. There was a calculation, and Paul was here, I was here, we know what happened. He had to calculate how much the district would lose after a reassessment. They put a limit on that calculation. That calculation was off, and in order to make the budget balance, the millage had to be adjusted. It really wasn't a tax increase. What year was that, Paul?
13, 14.
That would have been 15, 16.
15, 16.
Yes.
So that really wasn't a tax increase. I mean, that was a tax adjustment. So I think now's the time. If you want to build these things like you do, now's the time to increase the revenues coming in. As far as people are concerned, if you pay the same in property tax every year and dollars become less valuable, actually your taxes are going down every year.
Mr. Wallace, I appreciate that, and even the adjustment that you're talking about, as you probably remember in Pitcairn, after the reassessment values went down. So we did raise the taxes as an adjustment, which didn't even bring them back to the original place, and people got unelected because although your explanation is concise and brilliant, people hear tax increase, they hear tax increase. That's the fact. So the point that you're making, though, is unavoidable. Revenues are going down and the cost of everything is going up. We don't have many tools in that particular toolbox. So we are left every year, and every school board that goes forward, these school boards are going to become sacrificial lambs. They're going to raise taxes. Other folks are going to run for the school board guaranteeing they won't raise taxes. They're going to raise taxes because the expenses keep going up and the revenues keep going down. So I appreciate what you're saying, and personally, I agree with you, but this is the future. This is where we're headed. So
Our neighbors down the road, the Plum Borough School District, kick that can 8, 10 years every year without raising taxes, understanding that eventually the tipping point was reached. And that tipping point became a $5 million loan to pay for salaries. Thus, what we've seen in the media, and I know it's affected some members of this bargaining unit, our school district, who may have a wife or husband teaching at Plum, 28 furloughs. 28 in 1 year.
And half-day kindergarten. And they've gone down to half-day kindergarten.
Half-day
And they've cut
kindergarten.
language out of the middle school.
Absolutely. Languages
And I
removed.
believe they're down to $1 million in their fund balance.
These are issues that we're facing in public education today. This is not simply a Gateway issue. We have maintained ourselves respectfully with a solid fund balance. But understand, changes need to occur down the road. We are planning for that down the road. This board has maintained the integrity of all programs and course offerings, which are second to none in any school district. And you could look at those online through programs of studies. We've been able to capture through attrition without laying off individuals for years. But we have to begin to think differently down the road, which this board has started to with the possible sale of Gateway Middle School. Currently, we have 2 middle schools. The total enrollment of both middle schools was at one time housed in one middle school. This is the reality of declining enrollment, not necessarily attributed to just Gateway. It's everywhere. Families aren't having 3, 4, 5 kids. Declining enrollment is happening everywhere. And to maintain our current operation, we could be plumb 10 years down the road. So we need to think differently. Grant.
And along those lines, that's why I would say please consider a tax increase.
All right, so we've had 2 people,
Because, and I don't want my daughter to have programs cut from her classes. I want the tax increase because I want it to stay Gateway the way it has been.
So we've had
Please consider.
2 teachers right now say please.
Taxpayers.
Taxpayers.
605 12th Street, Pitcairn, Pennsylvania.
We've had at least 2 humans from Monroeville say that they want a tax increase. So let me give you an excerpt at what some humans said at Plum a couple days ago. The same sort of thing. A teacher stood up and said, "I'm a teacher. The millage rate and taxes need to be increased." Next person, "I'm frustrated." Next person, "The history of the board's budget votes over the past 10 years demonstrates that shortfall monies were routinely taken from the reserve fund balance account or other balance accounts, and the board failed to raise the millage rates." So the audience was chastising the board members for failing for a long time to raise rates that would have kept them from getting into a quandary. Going on, somebody said a $7 per month increase is very reasonable. Please vote to increase our taxes and don't cut our programs or our teachers. Next, a lame duck motivated politician on the school board vote against a tax increase will likely hurt future boards. That was insightful. That is, board members should not be cowards. We should do what's right, whether we like it or not, whether we pledge to not increase taxes or the opposite. We should look at where we are and do what's ever right, whether it gets us voted in or not voted in. We're here not to maintain our status. We're here to serve the teachers, the staff, the citizens, the students, and the future students. Please don't clap for me. I don't accept applause or, what's the opposite of applause?
Booze.
Brickbatting. I will only do what's right, whether I like it or not. So I don't do that. Next. Don't cut our advanced placement Spanish language program. And people were saying, here's my favorite thing. You can cut other stuff except my favorite thing. Well, that doesn't wash. A board must take into account everything. Next. Our senior citizens, someone said, understand that a strong school district is essential for a sound community. Our seniors are not opposed to tax increases. Really? These people were saying, yes, our senior citizens are not unwise. They understand, like Mr. Bova said, prices of everything are going up. If we want to do what's right for not only this generation, but the next generation, we're prepared to do whatever's necessary to help the school district succeed. Our seniors said that, good for the seniors. Next, somebody said kindergarten is important. We can afford a tax increase instead of cutting half the kindergarten day or something. Next, the next PTA president doesn't favor cutting teachers or programs. Next, somebody said, just don't cut our librarians. Next, somebody said, don't inadvertently also discriminate against our advanced placement students by cutting our gifted education program. That's clever too. Last, I'm a special ed teacher and I love my job. Why did you furlough me? So you can see the pain being expressed by our neighbors in Plum. And that's just Plum. Many school districts all over Pennsylvania whose agony is as great or greater. So this board must balance the needs that we see right now, both infrastructure, scoreboard, technology, teachers, sale of buildings, buses, the price of gasoline. We have to balance all of that stuff. So please don't, if you are frustrated, start out by saying, you guys are doing a great job. Could you try to do X, Y, or Z differently? In other words, we're not here to get beat up. We're here to serve you. And we don't serve you well if we get chastised too often. So I've been on the board about 3 years now. I rarely get pats on the back. Wonder if the other board members get pats on the back. We always try to give the teachers, the students, the volunteers, everybody, the staff here, buildings and grounds, technology guys, we always try to give you pats on the back. So if we're going to live together and work together as neighbors, let's recognize that when the board makes awful mistakes, we should forgive them. When the teachers make awful mistakes, we should forgive them. When the taxpayers make awful mistakes, we need to have forgiveness. We need to have a protocol of civil discourse. So make room for some of the mistakes that this poor board is going to do over the next year or so and that future boards will do. We're still trying to do our level best to serve the teachers and the future teachers and the students and the administrators and the taxpayers. So I would like to say, give us a break. That's the short way of saying it. But what I'd like to say is, I expect that we all must live and work together. Isn't that, wouldn't you like to move to a place, wouldn't your business like to move to a place where that is the protocol? I think people would flock to come in and set up a business where we work together in a coherent fashion, a civil and coherent fashion. That's what's going to attract people into our district, rather than have them move away or take their studies at home or other places. This will be the place where we can succeed. I went on awfully long, but you can see this is pent up inside me for a long, long time, and I don't speak very much, so forgive me and thank you.
With that said, do we have any additional questions? Matt?
I do. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you. I'm down here, in case you're looking for me. Hi, I'm a parent, not a teacher. I am a graduate of Gateway and a returning boomer, if you will, to come back to Monroeville because I want my daughter to graduate from Gateway. So the education is very important to me, so I appreciate what all of you do. I also appreciate, with the multiple schools that we have lived in, that the teachers don't provide a list at Target or Walmart that I have to buy school supplies every year. So thank you for all of that, because you all provide that. So it is uniquely different in every location. My question is, in your budget, because I don't know the answer, if you sell the middle school, I know there's still discussions of how that's going to happen. My daughter is in 4th grade at UP. Where is she going to go? I grew up in UP. I just want to know where she's going to end up. UP is not a big elementary school. Are you going to add to it? Is her class size going to get bigger? And is the budget accounting for that potential sale this year, which could impact what's going to happen with those schools next year?
On cue. You ready?
I'm ready.
On June 14th, we will be holding a Building and Grounds meeting here in the LGI at 6 p.m., I believe. Mary Beth, 6:30, 6.
Let me look.
I think it's 6. At that time, we will be not necessarily unveiling a plan, but options related to the school year 2019, 2020.
6 p.m.
6 p.m., thank you. This upcoming school year, 18-19, the school district is committed to operating on a status quo, meaning 2 middle schools, 4 elementaries, and a high school. It is the hope that during that time, over the next 6 or 7 months, the possibility of an offer for Gateway Middle School could come in. It would be the board's decision at that point whether to accept or reject that decision. But also understanding that PD PDE does have a timeline for closing a building, which we would begin probably in February of 2019 if it comes to that point. With the Building and Grounds meeting, we would be setting the stage for everyone to have input and understanding of the various options that could come, either with selling the property, keeping the property, renovating one middle school, Mosside Middle over Gateway Middle, or vice versa. Yes. And we would also be looking for maybe an adjunct committee of parents to have input as well.
Can I comment back on what Mr. Ritter said before we take new questions? It's nice that the people in this room are very supportive of a tax increase, but I guarantee you that there are people in this community that don't feel the same way as you do. Many of them would be senior citizens. I work in the office of a state representative, and I can tell you that on a weekly basis, seniors come to me and say, what is the state doing about property tax relief? What can you do? Why does my school taxes keep going up? Okay? I'm not saying that I agree or disagree. I'm just telling you the other side of the coin, and that there are people sitting in this room and who will be watching this meeting tomorrow and watching the PowerPoint who want to know the other side of the coin. And I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. We talked about this previously, you and I, but the public needs to know what will be cut if we don't pass a tax increase. So I'm going to ask you to give a little bit more specific so that people can make an educated decision on, okay, if we do not raise your taxes, here is what is going to happen to your school. Can you please go into a little bit more detail, as I promised people they would get that information this evening?
Well, understanding that salary and benefits comprises nearly 70%.
Correct.
Of our operating budget. We have whittled down to the bare bones the individual building level budgets. Without raising taxes, we would be looking at nearly a $2 million shortfall for the 18-19 school year, which would include not only the furloughs that have already been received, but probably an additional 4 to 6 individual furloughs that would result in various departments throughout the district, including additional cuts in technology, operations, with maintenance, custodial, all of the above, in order to get to the level and programs of $2 million. And those programs could cover anything from a world language to electives throughout the high school, which then would impact staff. So that is what we're faced with if a tax increase would not occur. Thank you.
Thank you.
Could you hang on just for a second so the folks can hear?
I am simply here because I'm interested in how the school board is spending the money. Based on what I've heard so far, I have no problem with the tax increase. I can give you $60 extra next year. That's not a problem. If people can't do the $60 extra a year, we need to convince them that they should. But I don't want it interpreted that okaying a tax increase and encouraging you to vote on a tax increase is a license to spend. And if you can make that promise, then you have our support, my support.
This board and the previous boards have been very committed to understanding their role as the oversight of the tax dollars. We are in the financial position we are in because of the work that all of the board members and the administration and staff has done over the last probably 10 to 15 years. If there's been a retirement, we've been able to capture that through attrition, looking heavily at enrollment at our kindergarten through 4th grade levels, knowing that eventually they will be at the middle school and high school, without impacting class size, programs, or the elimination of course offerings. This board is very prudent in determining how and when to increase taxes, as you can see from the list above. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
What was it?
So can we address the scoreboard for a second?
Mm-hmm.
Scotty, is it fair to say, do you want to handle this, or is it's fair to tell the public that we have not purchased this scoreboard yet?
We have not purchased the scoreboard. We are going to wait till we receive advertising to pay for the scoreboard. So more or less, the scoreboard would be a moot point.
Yeah, the scoreboard has not been purchased, contrary to some rumors that have been floating out there. We understand that with that cost, we're looking for the sponsorship in order to do that.
Could I have a show of hands? How many Gateway taxpayers are in here?
Okay, there are about 100 people in the room. I would say 93% are Gateway taxpayers.
As many of
That was about 80% clearly, John.
What? Okay, so we have a difference.
As many of you know, I've been on the school board 16 years. And no matter what choice this school board makes, half this room will hate us, half will like us. And it goes with anything that this board does. And we can leave here, for the people that don't live here, we live here, we go to Giant Eagle, get gas, whatever, and we just get beat up constantly. This is a very thankless job, and no matter what we do, you know, we get beat up. But know that our hearts are in the right place, and we want what's best for our kids here. And that includes the best teachers and administrators and everything else. And through the years, I've known that we've had a lot of changes, but the one constant that we have had, and I thank you guys, are the teachers. And I know at times with some superintendents and administrators in the past, it's been a rough road. And what we've tried to do is get one administrator as a superintendent to be here 5-10 years, assistant superintendents, administrators that are going to be here. So everybody knows their role, everybody knows their job, and to make your life easier. But the school board does face difficult challenges, and at this time we have one. And we're going to try our best to do what's in the best interest of the communities of Monroeville, Pitcairn, and everybody in this room. So just know that. We're not here to punish you or hurt somebody. We're trying to do what's best for everybody here.
Mr. Schott, first of all, you're a Cheryl,
Could you bring the microphone down, please?
Paul's handing out popcorn up at the top.
That's good. Micah, do we have a second microphone?
First of all, this man is great. If you work with school districts, not everybody is like this, so
Cheryl,
thank you.
Cheryl, you're pointing to Paul Schott.
Paul Schott, correctly.
Giving him kudos.
One of the conversations, and we haven't talked about this, and I apologize because I've had to miss some of the budget meetings, and it may be in the May PowerPoint. One of the conversations we have at the state level about funding is wage tax versus property tax. Now, tonight we were talking about an increase in property tax. One of the big bugaboos, and I'm retired, my family's paid taxes in this community for 70 years. We have to have the increase 2.8, which is the ceiling, because you didn't go to the Department of Ed and ask for an exception. So be it. But what bothers me more than anything is of the houses that people pay property tax, how many are senior citizens on fixed income? I'm a senior citizen, and now I'm currently retired. So this has changed life for me. What bothers me when I follow a Gateway school bus through the community is the number of rental properties we have with kids getting off and going into those apartments. Now, I realize the landlords pay property tax, but my biggest thing is Those parents have no vested interest in the school district because they're paying squat, because when they pay their rent, that's involved in the actual property tax. They don't see it. So what my concern is, what's the bottom line as far as wage tax goes? Because you're talking about increasing property tax. What about increasing wage tax on people that are actually making an income, including people who are not owning property but are living here in the community? Because I really think parents do a better job of watching their kids' performance in school when they have a vested interest, and that's called MONEY. So is wage tax, I mean, I don't know what our bottom line wage tax figure is. This is a big conversation. A lot of places are looking, should we increase wage taxes and eliminate or reduce property tax? So I guess my question is, how does that play into this, the wage tax factor? It's not enough monies?
I don't think that's up to us.
Well, I'm just wondering.
If I could comment, in terms of that specific.
Well, if you have school district proper wage tax.
Correct. Sure. We do get a portion of that. We've been fortunate. I mean, our earned income taxes have been increasing from year to year. I want to say from anywhere from $50,000 to $60,000. I want to say back in, I think it was 2006, 2007, we actually put a referendum question on the ballot. We were required, not only Gateway, but all 500 school districts. And I want to say, if I recall correctly, at the time, it was to actually see if we wanted to convert our earned income tax to a personal income tax. So that was looked at as well. We actually had a committee. We analyzed statistical information. We came back with a recommendation. We actually devised the ballot question, placed it on there. It was overwhelmingly rejected for that. But in terms of looking at, and again, this is a very big conversation, in terms of looking at earned income tax in relation to property tax, whether you increase one or you decrease the other, you're essentially looking at some type of a tax shift from one to the other with that as well. But even at the state level, I mean, in terms of some of the things they'd like to do, for instance, the question we saw back, I think it was last fall, was whether the taxpayers would be willing to increase the homestead exclusion to 100%, which was the vehicle to give the state the option of funding property tax relief 100%. But the problem with that is that they have the ability to do that. The problem is they don't have the revenue to do that. So whether, there's a number of different things that they could come up with in their arsenal, so to speak, of finances. Would they decide to raise the state personal income tax? Would they decide to divert more gaming monies? Would they decide to legalize marijuana and utilize those monies to fund that as well? I mean, we just don't know for that. Or the other thing, which in my opinion I think is more fair, is to raise the sales tax. That way it's equitable. If you make a certain amount of money, you spend a certain amount of tax. So maybe, we have 7% here across the state. In most places it's 6%. Does that mean raising the sales tax 8%, 9%? Does that mean to take off some of the exclusions, say for instance clothing, food? I mean, we don't know, but there definitely are some options that the state has. And in terms of exactly what road they decide to go down, I mean, we definitely don't know that.
That is a state conversation, but I'm talking about Gateway. I want to see if you look at other school districts and communities, because I used to pay for the longest time my wage tax directly. So I would see that wage tax going in there.
Cheryl, I don't think the school board can raise wage tax.
Well, that was my question. Who can do that?
Yeah, that's the municipality that controls the wage tax here.
But how is it? So they control all the wage tax, including the portion that you get.
Paul or Bill, I have not any knowledge that we can control the amount of wage tax that we collect from Monroeville.
It's either at the county or municipal.
So nobody knows about this for sure?
As a school board member, no, I don't, because it's just not something that falls under us. I'm not sure.
Do you have a line item that shows what you get?
In terms of what we have budget, I don't have that up in this slide presentation. It's actually in the May presentation. It's under the top 10 list of revenues. I want to say, just right off the top of my head, I want to say in total between the municipality of Monroeville and Pitcairn, I want to say we have budgeted $3.6 million in earned income tax coming in for next year.
I find that curious because you get a form that says Gateway this percentage, municipality this percentage for wage tax.
It is split. I want to say it's 1 full percent goes to the municipality and 0.5% goes to the districts. So it's a total rate of 1.5% for a resident residing in Monroeville or the borough.
So if I want to know more about that and what you get, I have to ask the municipality.
Possibly for that part of it.
And another point that I believe is similar to what Cheryl was discussing there is Pennsylvania currently ranks 46th in the nation of state funding for public education. Think about that, 46th. We continue to be regressive in nature of what the public, or I should say the state, offers public education, which is alarming.
And I want to say, just to dovetail on that, 22% of our funding, only 22% comes from state subsidies and reimbursements.
Paul,
1%.
I got a quick answer.
1 to 3%.
Contrary to popular belief, the school board has a pretty good relationship with the current council. The municipalities and the boroughs control the wage tax. Yes.
I'm just thinking of ways to get revenue from people that actually work as opposed to people that are now retired. You know what I mean? To balance that somehow, because that is a conversation. That's a conversation you could have too if you're looking at property owners who are retired as opposed to people that are working, especially since we have so many apartments.
Cheryl,
and those people.
I like the way you think.
Well, this is the conversation.
Think outside the box.
This is the conversation that's being
Thinking outside
had.
the box, forward thinking, I like that.
You always have to look at your options. Another question, though, real fast. The 5 to 15% fund balance, which is considered, who defines that 5 to 15%? How is that considered? Who says that's a good? And what would happen if you dropped to 5%, other than with the mall situation, we would have gotten burnt? But who defines the 5 to 15%?
I'm trying to remember where I ran across that. I think that's more of a best practice in terms of school business to maintain that. I will say, looking at some of our amounts, even with where it started for the current fiscal year to where we're projecting it, there's actually some of our neighbors right now that if they would show a similar type of slide, they would be starting with negative fund balance. I mean, literally negative. I just don't know how you could operate in that manner. Now, well, I won't confuse the issue, but again, there are some districts that literally have a negative fund balance at the fund level, and this is considered at the fund level. The numbers that we were showing to everyone this evening for that. And again, and then there was, and I'm trying to, I won't name the district, but there was one district, I guess, and because unfortunately I don't have all the details, but I believe they had to take out a $10 or $11 million loan just to pay their bills, taking on debt to pay your bills. I mean, I can't fathom that. They're overspending.
But how risky is it to go from 8.5 to 7? You're in this business. How risky is it to drop like that?
I mean, you always want to have a healthy fund balance, but even with the projections that we're showing this evening, I mean, myself personally, I'm comfortable with those numbers on there, with that, in terms of what's been utilized, the purposes that have been utilized for that. But again, it's one of those things we have to keep an eye on that. And if we're talking, as Dr. Short had mentioned about doing some potential renovations, I wouldn't recommend taking additional large amounts of fund balance out. For instance, I wouldn't say, hey, we could take $4 million out of the $6 million there, let's put it towards a renovation. No, I would be more on the lines, and again, until we have the actual numbers, I would anticipate taking out a new bond issue. That would make the most sense. And if we're talking about doing some renovations, we would look at all of our facilities and say, what are our total needs? Similar to what we did back in '97 when we looked at, and if anyone recalls, we touched every building throughout the course of the district. So I would anticipate, again, me personally, a new bond issue potentially. Again, we don't know for sure. To basically take care of all of our projects in one fell swoop. So maybe we don't have to worry about it for another 30, 40 years, depending on what, to what degree we're talking about for that.
We've been systematically making improvements to the necessary items such as roofs throughout the district, infrastructure that maybe you don't necessarily see, heating, boilers, etc. So we feel that we've done a very good job in doing so, capturing that money either through savings from a previous budget and or fund balance.
Very good. Are we done? One more question? Two more?
Have you considered
Have you considered splitting, like taking half of the 2 million from the fund balance and only raising the millage 1.4?
There are variations that have been discussed between kind of like a hybrid approach.
A hybrid.
Yes.
Okay, so you are considering that. And my last just comment was word of caution as a former Plum Borough person, that cutting programs, I know that I know that there are people in Plum that are very upset with the amount of programs that are cut in Plum and now are going cyber school. So whereas if you cut programs and then people leave to go to cyber, now your cyber is going up. So it's not, you're almost shooting yourself in the foot, because now, you know, where you're trying to save money, now you're adding money to your cyber costs.
Like closing Pitcairn.
And understand
we learned that lesson from when we sold Pitcairn.
I just have a,
internally.
I just have a couple of questions and a comment. How many, if this is public information, how many negotiation sessions have you had? And do you plan on having any more in the near future as a concerned taxpayer?
Absolutely not.
I'm sorry?
It's just a joke, Dave. I said absolutely not.
I
We're done.
hear you.
Right, Mr. Wallace?
But you know, I was a little dismayed when I read the paper and I see that, you know, the two sides seem to be far apart, and it's, you know, is it time to lock you people in a room and say, okay, let's hash it out? Because obviously we're going to have a tax increase. I think that's a given, and the last thing I want to see happen is a strike or acrimony between the union and the administrators and management. We all know it's, you know, adversarial in a sense, but, you know, I was hoping that this would be finished before the school year ended, and unfortunately it wasn't, and I'd like to see it finished before you finalize your budget, you know, because I know I'm going to pay more taxes. You know, my daughters went to school here. I don't have children in the school district anymore, but they got a good education and they've got good careers because of Gateway. But you need to hash this out and get it fixed. And, you know, nobody's going to win if we have a strike. Nobody. Both sides will lose. Like Mr. Ritter said about, you know, we didn't, you know, don't point the finger at us, you know, let's not do this. Let's not point at each other, let's get it done.
Let's work together, fight together, struggle together, and win together.
Yeah, let's get it done. Thank you.
How do you do this?
Anything else?
One item that I wanted to touch on, following up on Dawn's statement. We are actively going to pursue those children that I had mentioned earlier that may come into our district at various points throughout the school year, typically in the summer for enrollment. Those families who have attended other brick and mortar charter schools and or cyber charter schools. We have a plan in place. I know Marcy has been on a peripheral of discussions, and we're going to be pounding the pavement to sell our product because we know our product is second to none. We know that. Parents know that. But when they see that we're invested in them receiving their education at Gateway, I think it's important that we take those extra steps. And if that means knocking on doors, myself included, we will do that. Because every student that we can retain or have attend our schools and or cyber school is a savings of...
Regular ed's about a little over 14,000. Special ed's a little over 32,000
per
that's a lot of
student.
money. It's a lot of money.
So if you have 200 students at various cyber schools, PA, Charter Connections, do the math. It's expensive, not including transportation's included in that cost.
So, Scotty, may I invite folks at home to come to our next study session, which will be June 19th. That's a Tuesday, 2 Tuesdays from now. And then on the 27th, we have our regular session meeting. That's a couple Wednesdays from now.
Thank you, John.
I do have a question because I've attended most of these. And the last meeting, you had the slide up with the elementary schools, the attendance, the grade levels. I'm still concerned with University Park, specifically third grade next year. Has there been any talk and what's going to happen with them?
We are still currently evaluating staffing at the elementary buildings. One positive note that I can say, kindergarten enrollment has been increasing steadily to a point that we haven't seen in years with enrollment. Probably 190, maybe 195 students, which is up significantly from where it's been over the last 2 or 3 years. So that's a positive. As far as the actual classes within certain elementary buildings, no final decision has been made. We are, of course, waiting for the budget to be passed with that information.
So when do I need to be getting more University Park third grade parents here? Because this is my concern, because kindergarten going into first grade, we were upset and we're kind of ignored. First grade going into second grade, we were told it's going to be dealt with, it's fine. 27, 27, 26 isn't uncalled for, but when you have the largest class sizes in the building, it makes it hard for your teachers to even teach a class of 27 kids to get around those 27 kids. Those extra 3-5 minutes a day each of those children would get with the teacher makes the world of a difference.
And understand that there are bubble classes within our elementary schools. An example, maybe second or third grade at Evergreen may only have 2 teachers. In reality, perhaps we can then move a teacher to help offset University Park once the numbers become more what I like to call official and real, which is probably near July. So once we have an indication of where we're at with staffing and students, we would make those decisions.
Okay.
So stay tuned.
Oh, I will.
Once again, just a reminder, June 14th, Building and Grounds meeting here in the LGI, and this will be a very important meeting to discuss really consolidation, reconfiguration of schools for the Gateway School District. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.